Hello. I asked the people backstage to teach me one thing in Spanish because I saw that everyone opened with one sentence in Spanish. So mine is soy una sombra, which I think means I'm an umbrella. I thought I'm going to impress you with that. Thank you. Yeah. It's a lot of effort of 3 people to teach me each word at a time. So I'm going to speak very, very fast, so I hope the translators in the back are ready, and you should all be really focused, because we're going to have 17 minutes of me walking you through something that I hope will change your perception of your own brain. So we all make decisions all the time. And I'm interested in understanding how decisions are being made in the brain and what drives them and what influences them. And what neuroscientists like myself have learned in the last couple of years is that decisions in our brain are made by a collection of many voices in our head that all vie for dominance and compete together on you. And at the end, they vote, decide what you're going to do, and only then, only after, do you become conscious of your actions. So you don't know about all the things that happened after the hood and below everything that is accessible to you. But you always feel like you're in control. And the thing is, our decisions are made by a lot of voices that not all are aligned with the same interests, but your explanation always assumed that everything made sense. And therefore, we think we can explain everything by just listening to the last person who spoke. And what we learned in the last couple of years is that, in fact, the last person who speaks doesn't really know a lot about you, and most of what his job is to come up with a narrative for your life, to take all the actions that you did and make them into a story. And this means that many times the story we tell is not accurate, is not full, and it misses significant parts of our identity. Now, this is hard to understand and hard to explain, and I tried myself to find ways to demonstrate it to myself since I was interested in neuroscience. And then at one point, I remembered one experience that I had as a child that helped me really get a sense of this feeling. This is a computer game that I used to play when I was about 6 years old. Some of you, I see, know it. When I grew up in Israel in the early 80s, computer games were really expensive. So if you wanted to play them, you would go to a video game store, and you played there. And I played this little game that some of you know. You're playing this Italian plumber. You're trying to save the princess that sits at the top. And there's this vicious gorilla that throws barrels at you. It tries to stop you from getting there. And I was playing this game for about 30 seconds or so, doing pretty well, getting high into level 2 and feeling that I'm in control, when suddenly 2 words appeared on the screen that changed my entire perception of control. And the words were, insert coin. Because what happened was, I wasn't playing the game at all. I was watching a video of the game playing itself, a demo. But I felt I was in control. And why is that? Because I was sitting there and moving the joystick, and things happened. Now, I moved right, and the character probably moved right sometimes, and I tried to jump, and it probably jumped sometime. But this was a movie, and because the movie and my intentions were aligned, I felt I was controlling it entirely. And only when the 2 words appeared on the screen and showed to me clearly that I was just watching a movie did I have to grasp the fact that I was just sitting there and observing reality rather than controlling it. And this, to me, is a great analogy for life. Our brain creates experiences for us, moves us around, moves things in our life, and we come later and explain them thinking that we're in control. And if this is true, it means that we can change things in your brain and maybe change your actions following without you knowing that it wasn't really fully your desire. To demonstrate that, we did one study that followed on a really, really rigorous work of 2 guys that I really like, Lars Hall and Peter Johansson, that showed that you can actually, in a short time, make people change their perception of things and really feel that they have full control. So in this study, we brought people to the lab. We told them, we want you to make a choice, a very simple choice, one that doesn't really take a lot of thinking. We're going to show you 2 cards with 2 pictures of guys, and we ask you to tell us, who do you find more attractive, the guy on the left or the guy on the right? Let's do it with a show of hands. How many of you think the guy on the left is more attractive? How many think the guy on the right is more attractive? They're both my friends, so I'm not going to tell them what happened just now. I'm glad that the picture is only showing me, not you guys. So you come to the experiment, we show you 2 cards, you make a choice, you don't know any of them, so it makes nothing meaning to you. You take a card, and then we give you the card you picked, and we ask you to explain to us in 1 sentence why you picked the card you picked. So you might say, I picked the guy on the left because he is smiling and I like people who smile. And you say, fantastic, great choice, keep the card, another one. We pick 2 new cards, show you 2 new pictures, ask you to make a choice, give you the card you chose, and ask you to explain. You did it for about 1 hour. One after the other, choices that seemingly are not important. But this experiment actually has a trick. And the trick is that every now and then, every 20 trials or so, we give you the card you didn't pick. So the guy in the back is a magician, and he uses sleight of hands to give you the card you didn't choose. If you chose the guy on the left, he would give you the card on the right. And 2 interesting things happen. First, people rarely notice. Because it happens rarely, and because it doesn't really feel important to us, it's all random choices, people don't notice that the card they received wasn't the one they chose. But what's more interesting is that then they go on and explain to me why they chose the card they didn't choose. And this is an interesting moment. At time 0, you make a choice. You commit to it. You feel this is your identity. And then you store it in your memory, and you move forward in life. When I come and I ask you to explain a choice, you don't really have access to the guy who chose things. All you have access to is your memories. So you use a different person in your brain to load your memories and explain them. And you never doubt that maybe the memory is not accurate. Maybe something changed there. And this means that someone can hack into your brain and put new information there, and you would load it as if it's yours, and move forward in reality and think that this was always there, and you put it there, and you would actually live life creating a complex narrative around a choice that you didn't make yourself. And this means that hackers can go into your brain now and change your behavior and your reality. And I know that because I used to be a hacker myself. So before I became a neuroscientist, I spent over a decade of my life breaking into computers and trying to steal data and money from banks, from governments, from companies, to show them the flaws in their security and help them secure themselves better from the real bad guys. We use what we call active marketing. You first break in, and then you come to them and you say, I broke into your system, please let me now help you do it better. Usually you get hired if you do it this way. And we used many techniques to break into banks. Obviously, if you break into banks, this gives a lot of room for interesting stories when sometimes you get arrested because the cops who come to the bank that you just broke into don't really believe you that you're a hacker that were allowed to do that, so you get to spend some time in various prisons all over the world until you convince them. Sometimes you break things that you can't fix. My colleagues at some point broke into a system and they wanted to show that you can get in and change some records, and they changed my record from being alive to being dead. And it turns out if you turn it back, it doesn't really go back because no system thinks that people can come back to life other than Elvis, Jesus, and Paul McCartney, and Tupac. So I think that there are some countries where I'm still declared dead because of that. And at the end of the day, it also gives us insights into humans' thinking. And I usually don't want to talk about my life as a hacker because I feel it kind of separate from my time as a neuroscientist. But since I came here, I was approached by a number of people who asked me if I can break into their spouses' phones or into their companies. So I feel like I need to live up to this and tell you one story about hacking that I think is relevant for what I'm going to tell you about the brain. So this is the first time I'm telling this story. And I hope I'm not going to sleep and say the name of the company that we worked for. But about 15 years ago, I was hired by a really big mobile phone company in the US to try to see if we can break into their security system. And we couldn't do it, so we started just teaching them our security and helping them protect themselves better from other bad guys. And one day there was an incident that really resonated with me following. Because at one point, around 5:45 p.m. one day, the person who sat in the headquarters at this company got a phone call. And 5:45 is not random time. It's right when the shift is about to be over. People usually leave at 6. So this was a moment where she was about to go home, and she really was eager to get it over with. And on the phone was a technician from the company who was sitting far in a remote place, was at a cell tower that broke. And he told her, I'm at the place, and I'm trying to fix this cell tower, and as long as I don't do it, everyone in this zip code cannot really get mobile reception. We're going to lose money. The thing is, I'm trying to access the tower, and I forgot the password. Can you give me the password for the cell tower on this zip code? And she was trained well, so she knows that you shouldn't give the password to someone on the phone. But she looks at the system, and she sees that indeed there is a cell tower there that's broken. So on the other hand, there's a problem because people are actually not able to use the phone. So she's really thinking what she should do, and she wants to go home already. And the guy on the phone really pushes her to give him the password. And she says, no, I was told not to do it, so I'm not going to give it to you. And the guy says, look, it's really an emergency. If I don't take it right now, I'm going to go for the weekend, and no one's going to come back to the zip code, so there's going to be no reception for 3 days. You're really taking a big risk here. And he even tells her, I know you don't believe me that it's me because there's no way for me to prove it to you, but I do remember the password from last week. It was ABCD 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm really who I say I am. And she actually looks, and the password last week was ABCD 1, 2, 3, 4. So she knows he knows the password from last week. And she's really taking a risk here. Will she give it to him or not? And she decides not to. And she goes home, scared. And when she comes back on Monday morning, she gets a call from the chief security officer for the company and says, congratulations. There was an attack on our systems on Friday evening. Some hackers broke in the system, made it seem like a tower is down. They even had access to the password from last week, and you stopped it. Congratulations, we're so proud of you. You really listened. We're going to actually now make it a poster case for the company. We're going to send a newsletter with the entire story to everyone. And they interview her over the phone, and they kind of try to ask her about how she learned things and how she did what she did and how she felt and so on. And while they're on the phone, the company is being hacked, and all towers are put down. Because the guy who called her on the phone, the chief security officer, to congratulate her, was me. What we did was a double-day attack, we call it, where you try one day, and when it doesn't work, you call a few days after to congratulate the person on the success, and then you use the information that they give you on the phone, their mother, maiden's name, where they were born, and so on, to hack the system while they're with you on the phone. And this is because humans have flaws that are ingrained in our psychology. We tend to be really, really secure when things come out from the outside, not as much when they're from the inside. We tend to really feel good if we stopped one attack and not really keep our guards as higher when the second one comes. And generally, we tend to trust protocols. If someone knows that passwords get changed every week, if someone knows that there's towers that fall down and you need to call this particular number, if someone knows things, we tend to believe. And this, to me, is a nice analogy for how the brain works. Our brain is really, really skeptical of things coming from the outside. If someone gives you a fact you don't really trust, you're going to be skeptical of him or her. If you really don't like that fact, you might say that this guy is lying before you doubt the facts, but you never doubt your own memories, your own brain. You think that whatever happens on the inside is yours. If someone told you that this didn't happen, that we weren't here yesterday, you would never believe them because it's in your memory right now. If they showed you a movie of yourself somewhere else, if thousands of friends will tell you that they were with you in a different place, you would still doubt everyone else before you doubt your own brain. Because we have this same idea of hacking, which is whatever is already in the inside is ours. Meaning, we always believe what's in our brain. We never believe the sentence that says, don't trust the things you think yourself. So when I moved from being a hacker to being a neuroscientist, I wanted to use this knowledge of how the brain is compartmentalized to actually see if we can come between and change your behavior and make you be a different person just by little nudges. So neuroscientists have been looking at the brain in various ways. They study it in different tools. Typically, there's two classes of tools. In humans, we can't go into the brain, so we look at the brain from the outside using machines like fMRI or EEG that scan the outside of the brain and try to infer what goes on the inside. And with animals, we can actually go into the brain and put microphones inside the head and listen to the brain speaking in its own language. And once we know the language of the brain, we can actually start talking to it in ways that hackers like, which is changing signals and seeing what goes on. Now, if you were to somehow have the ability to actually open a human brain and zoom in, what you will see there is a forest of little cells, we call them neurons, that have a language that sounds like this. These sounds, we call them firing, are brain cells speaking to one another. They use this electrochemical signal that we can translate to sound, and if we have microphones next to each cell, and we see when it fires, we can actually figure out what it cares about, because each cell starts bursting in activity when something in the outside world makes it tick. So if we can map things in the world to clicking in your brain, we can actually know how your thinking works. And I lied to you before. And I'm going to correct that. I told you that we cannot really look at the brains of humans from the inside. But in fact, there are a small group of people, and I'm one of them, that actually do just that. We work with patients who undergo brain surgery. And during the surgery, we place electrodes inside their head while keeping them awake. And we use the opportunity to actually have a human being with open brain with wires inside to say, you know, you're already here with open brain for a clinical purpose, but do you mind also talking to me about your feelings, emotions? I'm going to move this picture. Now it's going to stay forever. OK, good. And actually learning how your brain codes your thoughts. So this is how it looks. We have patients sitting in bed. We have wires inside their head. We put a laptop in front of their eyes, and we say, we're going to now show you all kinds of things like images or movies, and we're going to listen to your brain and try to figure out what the codes mean. So here's an example. Here's one patient sitting in bed, and she's viewing those images. And what you're going to hear now is the sound of one cell in her brain. Try to see what this cell cares about. What makes it fire? So this is one cell out of a cluster of small number of cells in this woman's brain that codes the concept of Marilyn Monroe. Every time she thinks about Marilyn Monroe, these cells burst in activity. And all of you have the same cells in your brain if you knew who Marilyn Monroe is. You all had cells that right now fired when you saw those pictures. This is how thinking looks inside the brain, a burst of activity of individual cells. And once we find cells whose properties we know, Marilyn Monroe, the Eiffel Tower, a Macintosh computer, the Big Ben in London, we can actually connect them to machines on the outside and start having you control the world using just your thoughts. So we can have the woman sitting in bed and just think of Marilyn Monroe and move a spaceship up and down just with her mind. Or we can have them sit there and just think about things, and we project their thoughts on a screen in front of their eyes, making them essentially visualize their thoughts on a screen in front of their eyes. And once we find that, we can actually trace the thoughts process in your brain step by step and see where the gaps happen, where one part stores things and another one loads it. And here's an example of that. What you see here is a picture that I can tell you right now your brain is already puzzled by. All of your brains are confused right now. They say, what's going on in this picture? And you don't know it, because the parts of your brain don't talk to each other. But we can see that they're not interacting because of a specific problem. What's happening here is that there's not just one picture flickering. These are actually two pictures that alternate. And there's one thing in those pictures that appears and disappears. Now, your brain already sees it right now. It just doesn't tell you. In your head, there's some spotlight that tries to fish around and find what it is, and it doesn't tell you. Raise your hand. Don't say it. Just raise your hand if you see it already. So if you don't see it, you can see that other people see it. You really get upset right now. You say, what's going on? I'm not seeing it. So you start scanning it from left to right. I got just for that. You start scanning it maybe from left to right, looking at this thing. You say, maybe it's the Canada flag. Maybe it's the beret. Maybe it's the number of windows here. Maybe it's the shadow. And I'm telling you that your brain already knows it. Just look at your brain and ask it. It's inside. I'm going to show it to you right now. It's the engine right here at the center. In front of your eyes. So right now, two parts of your brain just spoke for the first time and told you something. The nice thing about it is that you can never unknow it right now. It's going to be forever in your brain. This means that we can now trace using electrodes in your brain the flow of information and see where it disappears and when it becomes part of your consciousness. And once we learn that, we can actually say that if we know which part talks to who, we can come in between and eliminate things or maybe inject new ideas. And there are many moments in your life where your brain is really vulnerable, and it really likes to listen to the world without resisting it. So one of the moments that my colleagues and I are looking at right now is this moment, where your brain is really, really vulnerable and ready for changes. Your sleep. Turns out that sleep is not just a uniform thing. It's made of components, and there's one small window during the night where your brain is still listening to the outside world, but doesn't resist at all. Which means that if you can go into your brain right then and change something, you will actually incorporate it into your life. And when you wake up, you wouldn't know that it didn't come from you, and you will just assume it was always part of your narrative, and you're going to build a web of histories around that and move forward with it. So one of my colleagues actually used that to change behavior for the better by eliminating the need to smoke. She took smokers, and over a short nap of 2 hours, came to their brains and made their brain think of smoking differently by injecting the smell of nicotine into their nose, and then immediately afterwards the smell of rotten eggs that makes their brain associate bad things with smoking. Doing it enough time makes your brain create a new wiring, so when you wake up you have no memory of what happened, but suddenly you say, I don't really want to smoke anymore. I have this desire to decrease my smoking habits, and this lasts for a few days. Now we're trying to eliminate traumatic memories, memories that make you not like things like PTSD. We try to have you have to go to sleep and wake up with different experiences in life. And of course, the hallmark that we didn't succeed at, but we're aiming for, is try to have you go to sleep and wake up with different knowledge. Like you go to sleep and you wake up knowing Kung Fu. We didn't do it yet. The idea behind that is that sleep is this commodity that no one accesses right now, that a lot of things happen in, and we want to know if we can inject new ideas and new thoughts and new dreams into your life. So you can go to sleep and say, I want to have a dream by Spielberg overnight. Or you can go on a date with someone, and when you come back from the date, you don't just go to sleep side by side and end your life, but actually keep living the date in both of your minds simultaneously. Now, the fear here is that once we learn things like changing brains, I can tell you about all the good things we can do, but you can also see the bad things. How someone can go into your dream and make you wake up wanting to buy more Captain Crunch, or maybe have different views of political ideas. And all of those things are not blind to us. We know that historically, when technologies emerge, they often are being used not just for good, but also for evils. The thing is, technologies don't know what they're for. The steam engine didn't know if it's going to become a train that moves goods from New York to Los Angeles and helps things move faster, or if it's going to move Jews from a concentration camp in Germany to Auschwitz. So right now, the call is for people in the audience to become aware of those technologies, because what we learned is that when technologies emerge like these, oftentimes, if no one knows about them, it's used to create something that's not healthy for societies, at least in parallel to the good things. And right now, we live in a world where a lot of the power of our brain is being exploited by companies to actually harness the knowledge from hackers like myself and from neuroscientists like myself to actually hack into your brains and make you behave differently in a negative way. Because we became the product of many of those companies. And there are many ways to know that. And I found one that I thought is really easy for me to remember whether you are the product or you are the customer. And the answer is, if you're not paying for it, then you're the product and not the customer. And the reality is that for most of the things that we are offered for free right now, our brain is a tool being used by hackers like myself to come between your desires and your outcomes and change things to make you behave differently. And technologies are really powerful in doing that, because technologies have the ability to manipulate the control of our brain in ways that we didn't anticipate further and that evolution didn't train us for. Here's what I mean by that. Historically, if people like you or me stood at the top of a cliff, let's say, and looked down, we immediately got scared. Our heart was racing. We got really, really sweaty. And this was enough for us to know that we shouldn't jump. And those who jumped and fell from high, tall buildings didn't get to have kids. So evolution favored all the people who were scared, such that in our life, we are the descendants of all of those people who really knew to be afraid of heights. And our brain was trained for that. But now, we can create experiences that actually hijack the brain and go between those experiences, the fear and the decision, and actually create experiences that will make you do things that you weren't supposed to do. This guy wears a VR. And what he's experiencing is the right thing that should happen. His brain is scared. But the thing that happens right now is that as soon as he didn't fall, his brain learned something new, and in doing so, his brain is just rewired to not be afraid of something that should be afraid of. And the message here is that this is a small hack, not intentional even, that just did what I'm telling you. It came in between a feeling and an action, changed something, and from now on, this person is always going to be a little less scared of heights than he should be. So are his kids, his grandkids, and everyone he comes in contact with, because he's going to convey this change in our brain. Our brain is programmable. And if we don't program it ourselves, someone else will. And right now, we don't really know who are the people who do that. And we don't really have full control. Now, it sounds like I'm ending on a pessimistic note, but I'm not. I want to end with something optimistic. I started by telling you that our brain has many voices. And we only speak in the last one that kind of gets access to the vote of everyone. And we don't really know about all the things that happen behind the hood. Well, the truth is that neuroscientists are now slowly giving us access to all parts of our brain. And they show us that there are many facets of our identity that weren't manifested before, and that as we learn how to speak to them and listen to them, we'll know better how to align our outcomes with our desires. But it's really hard. It's hard because it's hard for our brains to grasp the fact that there are other voices out there that we don't really listen or see normally. And I tried my best to find ways to convince myself that we should just try to let the tools of neuroscience help us. And I found one analogy from my colleague David Eagleman that I think is helping me, and I hope will help you, change your perception of how you can believe that there are more than one person in your brain and let them speak for you. This is an analogy from 407 years ago, when Galileo Galilei pointed his telescope to the moons of Jupiter to see how they orbit the planet. He saw that the movement wasn't aligned with his equations. And so the only way to align the equations was to actually change the making of the solar system, to put the sun in the center and to put Earth as just the third planet from the center. And in doing so, everything would work out. And when he did this, he didn't just change some equation, he actually changed the entire making of the universe that he knew. Because suddenly we could see far out into the horizon, way into the reaches of the universe that we didn't know existed before. And in the 400 years that followed, we expanded our view of the entire world through this change. Now, in the same way, in the last 10 years, neuroscientists are starting to see that in our brain we have many voices, and we might not be the most important one. We might not be the center of our own little universe. And this is tough for us to express, tough for us to believe, tough for us to grasp and to grapple with. This is like a dethronement of our identity. We're just one voice out of many in our head, and we might not even be the most important one. But in the same way that 400 years ago, this change in the making of the universe allowed us to see far out. Now, with this understanding of how our brain is broken down into pieces, we can actually start looking in and understanding the most interesting thing in the universe, which is us. Thank you.